Now this isn't going to be the usual compilation, and instead it's one long video on the Sunship of Possession. There's a lot that Father Iannuzzi shared in this clip, so you might want to listen to it multiple times.
We are living indeed in end times, no less trying than graceful. For when God at the wedding feast performed a miracle, Paul relates, in light of that miracle, God saved his best wine for last. And that is what's happening in these end times. Where sin abounds, as Paul says, grace abounds all the more. And where there is more evil, God will not let himself be outdone by it, but overcomes the evil with good. Although there are few that are good, those few sustain all the rest. This principle that God needs a few good ones to save all the others, or to at least dispose them, help dispose them with the Holy Spirit, to be saved. Basically, the sonship of possession enables the soul that lives in God's divine will for a deepening inner freedom of sonship received at baptism. Those who enjoy the sonship of possession maintain and cultivate through their ongoing inconveniences, mortifications, prayers, vigilances, exercises of the Christian virtues, the one eternal act that God gave our first parents. To make it simple, consider that I want to impact all creatures of all time with one prayer. Right? I cannot do that without God's one eternal act. All right, now God, who is beyond time and space, who is in time and space yet transcends both, can impact all things in one glance, one broad sweep. It could be one yes, one word, one heartbeat, one breath, whatever it may be. God can impact all things in one instant. We finite human creatures who live in time and space cannot. If you think that's not right, just try being physically in two places at once. That's called transtemporality, going through time or space. Well, in this case, it's space. This is called transspatiality, when you want to be in two places at once. If you want to go in two time zones at once, or in two different times in human history at once, that is called transtemporality. So we, by our own human industry or effort, cannot exercise transspatiality nor transtemporality. God alone can. Why? Because he is present in everything, even a blade of grass. Even in the atomic or molecular structures of physical entities, God is present. Without his natural grace that sustains all physical realities, such realities cannot exist. Not even a rock. All right? So God is different in all things in different ways. He's more present in a baptized infant than a blade of grass. He's more present in a mature adult than in a baptized infant. And he's more present in a saint or a mystic than in an adult. Okay? And then he's even more present in the Eucharist, and so on and so forth. So these different modalities of God's presence in all things gives all things their meaning, their ability to move, to exist, to breathe, to eat, etc. And when a soul lives in God's divine will and possesses his sonship of possession, it necessarily participates in his one eternal act that embraces all things and all times. How does this happen? Very simply, suppose I want to pray for all people in a particular cemetery where there are thousands of tombstones or monuments. I physically cannot see all of them at once. I cannot physically read all the tombstones at once. It's beyond my human ability. So how do I do it? Well, I go from one tombstone to the next in a very linear fashion. I read the tombstone, I pray for that individual who is dead, then I move on to the next and so on and so forth. All right. Now, suppose I go up in God's divine craft. He takes me beyond the clouds, and I look down with a bird's eye view from above, and I can see with perfect clarity all tombstones at once. Okay? and pray for them all in one broad sweep. Well, that's how the soul who lives the sonship of possession exercises its prayers, its mortifications, its acts of vigilance, the exercise of the virtues, and so forth. Every little thing that soul does impacts all creatures of all time. Now, because God gives to the soul freely this one eternal act of His, that we can do nothing of our own effort to possess, but only God enables us to possess it. Once we have this one eternal act, we therefore allow God to pray in us, to suffer in us, to offer up acts of vigilance, exercises of the virtues. In other words, God is doing everything in us with His one eternal act. We are not doing it. We do not possess God as God possesses us. Okay, only God can give us this gift. We cannot give it to ourselves. It's impossible. But once God gives it to us, that is His one eternal act, whereby we can impact all things at once, in every instant, we then may be said to possess God, not as the giver of the gift, but as the receiver of the gift He's given us. So God therefore remains God and we remain a creature. But in one cooperative act, God gives us His one eternal act, we receive it, and we add to it our finite acts in time and space. Our steps, our breaths, our heartbeats, our motions, our thoughts, our words, our actions, our sufferings, our mortifications, our acts of vigilance, our exercises of the virtues, and so on and so forth. All these little acts that humans do that begin and end in time and space are sustained by God's one eternal act, whereby God, not we, God extends these finite acts of ours to impact all creatures of all time. We can therefore say, the souls who possess the sonship of possession, who live in God's one eternal act, who participate in God's one eternal act, these souls are the ones who are the crowns and jewels of creation. These are the ones who continue the work that Adam and Eve forfeited with original sin. These are the ones that sustain the earth and the universe. Even though the angels and the principalities and powers and virtues and seraphim and the cherubim and the archangels and all these different 9 choirs of angels I mentioned, even though they are far more advanced than humans intellectually, spiritually, humans are more noble than they are. God ordained it this way. The letter to the Hebrews says that angels serve man. Man does not serve angels. Yes, we thank them, we pray to them for protection, we ask them to intercede for us, but they serve us, and they realize that. In fact, St. Irenaeus said that the reason Lucifer rebelled was because he would not serve man. God revealed to him, according to Irenaeus, who was a listener to St. John the Apostle, that Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, would assume a human and not angelic nature. And Lucifer said, "No way, Jose. I will never serve an intellect inferior to mine." So, seized with pride, he convinced 1/3 of the angels to overthrow God. Well, we know the story. God chose an angel of an inferior rank, an archangel, to defeat a seraphim, Lucifer, of a superior rank than Michael, to humble Michael, and cast him out of heaven along with the 1/3 that went to what Peter calls in his letter Tartarus, which is a Greek name. This is the underworld, and it's used in Greek literature among poets. Tartarus, waiting to be judged for the final general judgment. So these fallen angels that work with Lucifer, they're very much active today in these end times, where there's much evil being spread abroad, where there is the searing of consciences, the defection of faith, and the apostasy in the church. You see, this is happening, and this has been prophesied, so we have nothing to be alarmed about. Why? Number one, that those souls who live in the divine will have nothing to fear because God protects them. The divine justice imposes chastisements, but neither these nor God's enemies get close to those souls who live in the divine will. Know that I will have regard for the souls who live in my will, and for the places where these souls reside. They may be likened to the kings of the earth, who have their own court and quarters in which they are kept safe, amidst dangers and among the fiercest enemies. These are the souls who live in my will, and in whom I live. The heavenly court crowds around them. The strength of my will keeps them safe, rendering their enemies' bullets ineffective and driving back the fiercest enemies. So there you have it. Jesus protects us. God protects us. He protects the souls who truly desire to live in His will. And this is something very comforting to us, because even though evil abounds, grace abounds all the more. This sonship of possession brings with it the ability to impact all things of all time. Now, Pope Saint John Paul II put out in these recent times an encyclical dedicated to the third Christian millennium, about these end times in which we're living, in which he affirmed that Christianity, in quotes, is on the threshold of a new springtime that begins with a rediscovery of the Church's holiness. Also, Pope John Paul II speaks of a new era in the life of the Church in the same encyclical. And that is taken from Article 18 of that encyclical, on the threshold of the third Christian millennium. I mention this because we are living in these times, and there's nothing to be alarmed about. It's rather something to rejoice in. Do you know that Sainte Thérèse de Lisieux, de l'Enfant Jésus, which is Saint Teresa of the infant face of Jesus, said that she would pray to God to be alive for the Antichrist. She wished she were alive in the days of the Antichrist because she wanted to give her life as a martyr to God when the Christian persecution was at its worst. That is the kind of martyrial love God is asking of His children, especially those who want to live in the divine will. Fear has no place in a soul who is truly set on living in God's divine will. Fear is absolutely useless. Jesus says that in the Gospels. Remember when there was a situation and people were weeping, and Jesus said, "What's all this noise? What's all this din?" Right? Well, He upbraided them in a nice way. Jesus always speaks in charity. That's one of the hallmarks of Jesus. And He said, what is all this? Fear is useless. Consider, for example, Matthew 8, chapter 50, Mark 5, chapter 36. In both of these Gospels, Jesus says in quotes, "Fear is useless. What is needed is trust." Right? Or take, for example, the first letter of John, chapter 4, verse 18, where John says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, for fear has to do with punishment, and he who fears is not perfected in love." Why? Because if someone is truly a son of God, when I speak of sonship of adoption, sonship of possession, I am speaking of a sonship to the Father. And that kind of sonship admits no fear at all, because the Son loves the Father, and the Father loves the Son. Now, there are several quotes I can refer you to, but one that stands out I will share with you and ask you after I read it where it comes from. Which mystic did Jesus say this quote to about fear? She writes, "Today, Jesus entered my room wearing a bright robe and girded with a golden belt, his whole figure resplendent with great majesty. He said, "My daughter, why are you giving in to thoughts of fear?" I answered, "O Lord, you know why." And he said, "Why? This work frightens me. You know that I am incapable of carrying it out." And he said, "Why? You see very well that I am not in good health, and I have no education, that I have no money, that I am an abyss of misery, that I fear contact with people. Jesus, I desire only you. You can release me from this." And the Lord said to me, "My daughter, what you have said is true. You are very miserable, and it pleased me to carry out this work of mercy precisely through you, who are nothing but misery itself. Do not fear. I will not leave you alone. Do whatever you can in this matter. I will accomplish everything that is lacking in you. You know what is within your power to do. Do that." Unquote. Well, if you didn't figure it out, this quote comes from St. Faustina Kowalska. It's entry 881 in her Diary of Divine Mercy. God also tells Faustina in entry 292, in quotes, "When a soul loves God sincerely, it ought not fear anything in the spiritual life. Let it subject itself to the action of grace, and let it not impose any restraints on itself in communing with the Lord." Unquote. So these are beautiful reminders to us in these end times. End times does not mean end of the world. That's still far off. We still have this era of peace, long period of peace awaiting mankind. But it has to go through the birth pangs, which we are experiencing, which is reported, I believe, in Revelation chapter 14, where Mary was found with child in labor, and the serpent tried to spew out a torrent to consume her and her child, but she fled to the desert for 3.5 years, where she was kept safe. I believe we are living in these times, but they will be short, and succeeded by a glorious epoch of universal Christianity, peace, where the meek will inherit the earth, where God's will reign on earth as in heaven, where Jesus in the Eucharist will be adored by all the earth's inhabitants, and the Immaculate Heart of Mary will replace the flag of the Red Square. The aim of man's existence is to live in God's will without fear, and to restore creation's rightful claims to its original splendor by the assimilation of Jesus' groans. Jesus is groaning in the church, inasmuch as he is head of the body of which we are members. And therefore what we experience, he experiences. And when we suffer as we are, well, certainly he does too, in his humanity. All right? In his humanity in heaven. So the Father does not suffer. The Spirit does not suffer. They have no humanity. But only the Son suffers. Yes, they are divine sufferings, but the sufferings affect his humanity. Not the divine nature of the Trinity, but the human nature of the Son, which is forever grafted to the divine nature. So we are called to become like Jesus, the Son of God, sons of possession of the gift of living in the divine will, without fear, in order to set creation free from its slavery to corruption, by our divine acts, our rounds, our morning offering, our prevenient act, every day without fail. This transformation of creation and freedom of creation from its slavery to corruption to the glorious freedom of the sons of God unfolds specifically through God's operation in the will of the human being, who by praying and acting in it reunites and restores the rights of creation. Remember, it is God who's doing everything in us through his one eternal operation, his one eternal act. As the soul accomplishes its rounds in creation by mystically bilocating its soul, penetrating and transforming and sublimating all creatures in God, there awakens in it a deep respect and awe for the world around it. In this sense, the soul acquires a new set of eyes, as it were, with which it beholds all created things as a sacred extension of God's divine being and beauty.
That will be all for the video this time. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And hopefully all of you have learned so much from this video. And remember, if ever you have any feedback or suggestion, please let us know in the comments below. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for your continuous support, contributions, and prayers. And until the next one, thanks again for watching and may God bless you.